The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening when David pulled his car into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner. He could have gone to any fancy restaurant in the city. With his wealth, he could eat at places where a single meal cost more than most people made in a week. But tonight, like so many other nights, he chose this simple little place on the edge of town. David looked back at his 12-year-old son in the back seat. The boy was staring out the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. His wheelchair was folded up in the back of their car, waiting to be unloaded. David's heart felt heavy as he watched his son. Life hadn't been easy for either of them since the accident 3 years ago. The boy had been a normal, active kid before that terrible day. He loved soccer, climbing trees, and running around the backyard with their dog. But one moment changed everything. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit their family car. David walked away with just a few cuts. His son wasn't so lucky. The doctors said he would never walk again. David got out of the car and opened the back door. He helped his son into the wheelchair, being extra careful like he always was. The boy didn't complain, even though David could see he was tired. They had spent the whole day at another doctor's appointment, hoping for some miracle that never seemed to come. The diner was warm and bright inside. It wasn't fancy at all. The floors were old, the tables had seen better days, and the walls were covered with pictures of local high school sports teams from years past. But there was something special about this place that David couldn't find anywhere else. The people here didn't stare at his son with pity in their eyes. They found their usual table by the window. David always asked for the same spot because it was easy for the wheelchair to fit, and his son liked watching the cars go by outside. The boy was quiet tonight, quieter than usual. David worried about him a lot these days. He used to be such a happy kid, always laughing and joking around. Now he spent most of his time looking sad and lost. Other families were eating dinner around them. David noticed how the kids at the next table were running around, playing and being loud. His son watched them with a look that broke David's heart. He knew what his boy was thinking. He used to be able to run and play like that, too. A young woman came over to their table with a big smile on her face. She was their usual waitress, and David was always impressed by how kind she was to his son. She didn't talk to him like he was different or broken. She just treated him like any other kid. "Hey there, you two," she said cheerfully. "How was your day?" David's son looked up and gave her a small smile. It was the first real smile David had seen from him all day. The waitress always had that effect on him. She made him feel normal. "We went to see another doctor today," David said. "Long day." The waitress nodded with understanding. She had a way of knowing when not to ask too many questions. "Well, how about we start with some of those chicken strips you love, and maybe a chocolate milkshake to make the day better?" The boy nodded, his smile getting a little bigger. David ordered his usual burger and coffee. As the waitress walked away, David noticed how she stopped at other tables, being just as kind and friendly with everyone. She wasn't putting on a show for them. This was just who she was. When their food came, David watched his son struggle with his chicken strips. The accident had affected more than just his legs. His hands didn't work as well as they used to either. Simple things like eating had become difficult. David wanted to help, but he knew his son needed to try on his own. Independence was important, even when it was hard to watch. The boy managed to eat most of his dinner, though it took him much longer than it used to. David tried to make conversation, talking about school and asking about his son's favorite TV shows, but he could tell the boy's heart wasn't in it. These days, nothing seemed to interest him much. As they sat there, David thought about all the money he had made over the years. He had built a successful business from nothing. He owned 3 houses, drove expensive cars, and had more money in the bank than he could spend in 2 lifetimes. But none of that money could fix what was broken in his son. None of it could bring back the happy, active boy he used to be. The diner was starting to empty out as the evening went on. It was getting close to their usual time to leave. David was about to ask for the check when something unexpected happened. Soft music started playing from an old radio behind the counter. It was a slow, gentle song that seemed to fill the quiet. restaurant. David noticed his son's head start to move slightly to the rhythm. For the first time in weeks, there was a spark of interest in his eyes. Music had always been something special to the boy. Before the accident, he used to dance around the house all the time, making up silly moves and laughing at himself. But now, sitting in his wheelchair, the boy could only move his upper body to the beat. David saw the frustration on his son's face as he realized his limitations once again. It was moments like these that were the hardest for both of them, when his son remembered all the things he used to be able to do but couldn't anymore. David reached over and squeezed his son's hand, gently. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? That everything would be okay? That wasn't true. That things would get better? He wasn't sure they would. So he just sat there, holding his son's hand, wishing he could take away all the pain and sadness. The music continued to play, and David watched as his son kept trying to move to it, even though it clearly made him sad. This was their life now. Moments of wanting something that seemed impossible to have. David felt more helpless than ever despite all his wealth and success. The music kept playing softly in the background as most of the dinner crowd began to leave. David watched his son's fingers tap against the armrest of his wheelchair, following the gentle rhythm. It was the most movement he had seen from the boy in days, and it made David's chest feel tight with both hope and sadness. The waitress was cleaning tables nearby, humming along to the tune. She had been working at the diner for almost 2 years now, and David had noticed how she always seemed to bring a little brightness to everyone around her. Tonight was no different. Even though she looked tired after a long shift, she still had that warm smile that made people feel welcome. As she wiped down the table next to theirs, she glanced over and saw the boy moving his head to the music. Something in her expression changed. It wasn't pity or sadness like David usually saw in people's faces when they looked at his son. Instead, there was recognition, almost like she understood something that others missed. The boy was trying to move more of his body now, swaying as much as he could in his chair. His face had a look of concentration, like he was remembering something from long ago. David knew that look. It was the same expression his son used to have when he would dance in their living room, spinning around and making up silly moves that would make the whole family laugh. But now, trapped in his wheelchair, the boy could only dream of moving freely. David saw the frustration building in his son's eyes as he tried to do more than his body would allow. It was heartbreaking to witness. Here was a child who had once moved with such joy, now struggling just to sway to a simple song. The waitress finished cleaning her table and walked over to them. David expected her to ask if they needed anything else or if they wanted their check. Instead, she did something completely unexpected. "That's a really nice song, isn't it?" she said to the boy, speaking directly to him instead of to David. Most adults talked to David about his son as if the boy couldn't speak for himself, but this waitress always treated him like any other kid. The boy nodded, his face lighting up a little. "I like music," he said quietly. His voice was soft, almost shy. He didn't talk to many people outside of his father and his teachers. "I can tell," the waitress said with a genuine smile. "You've got great rhythm. Do you like to dance?" The question hung in the air for a moment. David felt his stomach drop. Dancing was one of those painful topics they tried to avoid. His son used to love dancing more than almost anything else. But how could he dance now? The boy's face fell and he looked down at his wheelchair. "I used to," he whispered, "but I can't anymore." David started to say something, maybe to change the subject or apologize, but the waitress surprised him again. Instead of looking uncomfortable or sorry, she just nodded like she completely understood. "Who says you can't dance?" she asked gently. "Dancing isn't just about your feet, you know. It's about feeling the music and letting it move you however it can." The boy looked up at her with curiosity. No one had ever talked to him about dancing since the accident. Everyone always acted like it was something he had to forget about completely. The waitress glanced around the nearly empty diner. Only a few customers remained, and they were busy with their own conversations. The music was still playing, a sweet melody that seemed to invite movement. "Would you like to dance with me?" she asked the boy. David's eyes widened. He wasn't sure. He had heard correctly. The boy stared at the waitress in disbelief. "But I'm in a wheelchair," the boy said, confusion clear in his voice. "So?" The waitress replied with a shrug. "Your chair can dance too. Want to try?" Without waiting for an answer, she moved to the side of his wheelchair and gently placed one hand on the back of his chair and extended her other hand toward him. The boy hesitated for just a moment before reaching out and taking her hand. What happened next made David's breath catch in his throat. The waitress began to slowly move around the wheelchair, guiding it in a gentle circle while holding the boy's hand. She swayed to the music as she moved and encouraged the boy to move his upper body along with the rhythm. At first, the boy was stiff and uncertain, but as the waitress continued to move gracefully around him, something magical started to happen. The boy began to relax. His shoulders started moving to the beat. His free hand began to sway in the air. A smile slowly spread across his face. "That's it," the waitress encouraged. "Feel the music. Let it move through you." David watched in amazement as his son began to laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard in months. The boy's whole body was moving now as much as it could. His head was nodding to the beat, his shoulders were swaying, and his hand was dancing in the air. He looked happy, really truly happy. The waitress kept moving around the wheelchair, sometimes spinning herself, sometimes just swaying beside him. She made it look so natural, like dancing with someone in a wheelchair was the most normal thing in the world. Her movements were graceful but not fancy. She wasn't trying to show off. She was just sharing a moment of joy with a child who needed it desperately. Other people in the diner began to notice. A family with 2 young children stopped eating to watch. An elderly couple looked over with gentle smiles. But instead of the usual stares of pity or discomfort, these looks were different. People were smiling. They seemed to understand that they were witnessing something beautiful. One of the children from the nearby family got up from his table and started dancing too, right there beside the wheelchair. His little sister joined him, giggling as she spun around. Soon, the small area near their table had become an impromptu dance floor. The boy in the wheelchair was laughing now, really laughing. His eyes were bright with joy, and he was moving to the music with more freedom than David had seen since the accident. The waitress kept encouraging him, calling out things like beautiful and you're a natural. For those few precious minutes, David's son wasn't a disabled child. He wasn't someone to be pitied or helped. He was just a kid having fun, dancing to music he loved, surrounded by people who saw him for who he really was inside. David felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched his son experience pure happiness. This young waitress had given his boy something that all of David's money never could. She had given him back a piece of himself that everyone thought was lost forever. David sat frozen in his seat, watching something he never thought he would see again. His son was dancing. Really dancing. Not the way he used to before the accident, but in a completely new way that was just as beautiful. The joy on his boy's face was something David had almost forgotten existed. The music continued to play, and the waitress kept moving around the wheelchair with such natural grace. She wasn't doing this for show or to make herself look good. David could tell this was coming from her heart. The way she looked at his son, the gentle encouragement in her voice, the complete lack of awkwardness about the wheelchair. It was all so genuine. Other customers had stopped their conversations to watch, but for the first time since the accident, David didn't feel embarrassed or protective. These people weren't staring with pity. They were smiling, some of them even clapping along to the music. A few more children had joined the dancing, turning the small space into a celebration. David's son was laughing so hard now that tears were streaming down his face, happy tears. David couldn't remember the last time he had seen his boy cry from happiness instead of frustration or sadness. The sound of that laughter filled something inside David that had been empty for so long. As he watched, David began to realize something that shook him to his core. For 3 years he had been trying to fix his son. He had taken him to the best doctors, bought the most expensive equipment, hired the top therapists. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars searching for a cure, a treatment, anything that might bring back the boy his son used to be. But this waitress had done something none of those experts could do. She hadn't tried to fix anything. She hadn't treated his son like a problem that needed solving. Instead, she had simply seen a child who wanted to dance and found a way to make that possible. David thought about all the fancy restaurants they had stopped going to because people would stare. He remembered the birthday parties his son no longer got invited to because other parents felt uncomfortable. There were the school events they avoided, the family gatherings that became awkward, and the simple activities that had become impossible. But here in this humble little diner, his son was the center of attention in the best possible way. Children were dancing with him. Adults were smiling and encouraging him. No one was treating him like he was broken or different. They were treating him like he was special. The waitress caught David's eye and gave him a warm smile. There was something in her expression that told him she understood exactly what this moment meant. She wasn't just being kind to a disabled child. She was giving a father his son back. As the song began to wind down, the waitress slowly brought the dancing to a gentle stop. She knelt down beside the wheelchair so she was at eye level with the boy. Her face was glowing with genuine happiness. "That was amazing," she told him. "You're such a good dancer. I hope you'll dance with me again sometime." The boy was breathing hard from all the excitement, but his smile was the biggest David had seen in months. "That was so much fun," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I didn't know I could still dance." "Of course you can dance," the waitress said. "Dancing is about joy, not about how you move. And you, my friend, have got joy in spades." The other children who had joined in were now going back to their tables, chattering excitedly about the fun they had just had. Their parents were looking at David's son with new eyes, not as someone to feel sorry for, but as someone who had just brought happiness to their evening. An elderly woman from across the diner walked over to their table. David tensed up, expecting the usual awkward conversation about how sorry she was or how brave his son was. Instead, she surprised him. "Young man," she said to his son, "that was the most beautiful dancing I've seen in years. You made my whole evening brighter." His son beamed with pride. "Thank you," he said politely. "It was really fun." As the woman walked away, David noticed how straight his son was sitting in his wheelchair. For months, the boy had seemed to shrink into himself, slouching and trying to become invisible. But now he was sitting tall, looking around the diner with confidence instead of shame. The waitress stood up and looked at David. "He's got a gift," she said simply. "Don't let anyone tell you different." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," he managed to say. "I don't know how to thank you for what you just did." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. Your son did all the dancing. I just moved his chair around a little." But David knew it was so much more than that. This young woman had given his son something priceless, the feeling of being normal, of being included, of being celebrated instead of pitied. She had reminded both of them that joy was still possible, even when life looked completely different than they had planned. As they prepared to leave the diner, David's son was chattering excitedly about the dancing. He wanted to know if they could come back tomorrow, if the same music would be playing, if the waitress would be working. It was the most animated David had seen him since before the accident. Walking to the car, David's mind was racing. He kept thinking about what he had just witnessed. This waitress, who probably made barely enough money to pay her bills, had just given them something that all of his wealth couldn't buy. She had given them hope. But more than that, she had shown David that he had been thinking about his son's condition all wrong. He had been focusing on what his boy couldn't do, instead of celebrating what he could do. He had been trying to bring back the past instead of embracing the present. As he helped his son into the car, David made a decision. He was going to find out more about this remarkable young woman. Not because he felt sorry for her or wanted to show off his money, but because he had a feeling she might be the key to helping other families like his own. For the first time in 3 years, David felt truly hopeful about the future. His son was still disabled, still in a wheelchair, still facing challenges every day. But tonight had proved that those challenges didn't have to define their lives. Joy was still possible. Happiness was still within reach. And sometimes, the most powerful healing came not from expensive treatments, but from simple human kindness. The next morning, David couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the diner. His son had woken up in the best mood he'd been in for months, asking when they could go back and dance again. For the first time in years, the boy was excited about something, and David didn't want to lose that spark. But David was curious about something else too. The waitress had handled the situation with such natural ease, like she had done this kind of thing before. Most people became nervous and awkward around his son, not knowing what to say or how to act. This young woman had been completely different, and David wanted to understand why. He decided to drive by the diner during the lunch shift to see if she was working. He told himself he just wanted to thank her properly for what she had done. But deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Something about her had touched him in a way that went beyond gratitude. When he arrived at the diner, he could see her through the window, serving tables with the same warm smile she had shown his son. David sat in his car for a few minutes, watching her work. She moved between tables with energy and purpose, taking time to chat with customers, especially the older ones who seemed to be eating alone. David finally went inside and sat at a corner booth where he could observe without being obvious. He ordered coffee and a sandwich he didn't really want, just so he could watch her interact with people. What he saw amazed him. A man with a walking cane came in, moving slowly and struggling to get to his seat. Without being asked, the waitress quietly helped him settle in and made sure his cane was placed where he could easily reach it. She didn't make a big deal of it or draw attention to his difficulty walking. She just helped naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Later, an elderly woman came in who seemed confused about the menu. The waitress sat down beside her and patiently explained each item, even suggesting which meals might be easier to eat. Again, there was no condescension or impatience, just genuine care. David realized this wasn't just about his son. This waitress had a gift for seeing what people needed and helping them without making them feel embarrassed or different. It was a rare quality, and David found himself wondering how someone so young had developed such wisdom and compassion. Over the next few days, David made discreet inquiries. He wasn't trying to be sneaky, but he wanted to learn more about this remarkable young woman. He spoke casually with the diner's manager, mentioning how impressed he had been with the service. What he learned made him respect her even more. Her name was Lisa, and she had been working at the diner for almost 2 years. She was 26 years old and was studying to become a nurse at the community college. But nursing school was expensive, and even with financial aid, she was struggling to pay for her classes while working full-time. The manager told David that Lisa was one of the best employees they had ever had. She never called in sick, always stayed late when they needed help, and customers constantly asked specifically for her section. But what impressed the manager most was how she treated difficult customers and people who needed extra help. David learned that Lisa often stayed after her shift to help elderly customers who had trouble getting to their cars. She had been known to pay for meals for families who were clearly struggling financially, using her own tip money. Several regular customers had told the manager that Lisa was the reason they kept coming back to the diner. But the most important thing David discovered was about Lisa's personal life. She had a 7-year-old daughter who had been born with learning disabilities. The little girl struggled in school and needed special tutoring and therapy that wasn't covered by their basic insurance. Lisa was working 2 jobs to pay for these services while also trying to finish nursing school. This explained everything. Lisa understood what it was like to watch your child struggle with things that came easily to other kids. She knew the pain of seeing people stare or make thoughtless comments. She had learned through her own experience how to treat people with differences, not as problems to be fixed, but as individuals deserving of respect and dignity. David also found out that Lisa volunteered at a local community center on her only day off each week. She helped run a program for children with various disabilities, using music and movement to help them express themselves and build confidence. It wasn't part of her job or something she got paid for. She did it because she believed in it. The program was always short on funding and supplies. Lisa often brought materials from home or bought things with her own money. She had even convinced some of her nursing school classmates to volunteer their time to help the kids with physical therapy exercises. David learned that Lisa's dream was to specialize in pediatric nursing, working specifically with children who had disabilities. She wanted to open her own practice someday, one that would focus not just on medical care but on helping families navigate the emotional and social challenges that came with raising a child with special needs. But her dreams seemed far away. Nursing school was taking longer than expected because she could only afford to take a few classes at a time. Her car was old and unreliable, making it hard to get to clinical rotations. Her apartment was small and not in the best neighborhood, but it was all she could afford while supporting her daughter's needs. What struck David most was that despite all these challenges, Lisa never seemed bitter or defeated. Everyone who talked about her mentioned her positive attitude and her genuine care for others. She could have easily felt sorry for herself or become angry at the world for the difficulties she faced. Instead, she had chosen to use her experiences to help others. As David gathered this information, he felt a deep respect for this young woman growing inside him. She had less money in her bank account than he spent on a single business lunch, yet she was making a bigger difference in the world than he had ever made with all his wealth. That evening, as David sat in his home office surrounded by expensive furniture and awards from his business success, he thought about Lisa working, her second job at the grocery store. She would probably be on her feet for another 4 hours, then go home to help her daughter with homework before studying for her own classes late into the night. David realized that what he had witnessed at the diner wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was who Lisa truly was. Someone who saw need and responded to it naturally, whether it was his son wanting to dance, an elderly customer needing help, or children at the community center needing someone to believe in them. For the first time, in his adult life, David felt inspired by someone else's example. This waitress had shown him what real success looked like, and it had nothing to do with money in the bank. David spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about everything he had learned about Lisa. He had built his fortune by making smart business decisions, but this felt different. This wasn't about profit or success. This was about doing something that actually mattered. On Thursday morning, David made a phone call to his lawyer. He had an idea that was so big, so different from anything he had ever done that even he wasn't sure it would work. But he couldn't stop thinking about all the families out there who were struggling like he and his son had been. All the children who needed someone like Lisa to show them that they were valuable just as they were. His lawyer thought he was crazy at first. David wanted to start a foundation, but not the usual kind that rich people created to get tax breaks. This would be different. This would be real. The next evening, David returned to the diner with his son. The boy had been asking to go back every day since their magical dance experience. When they walked in, Lisa's face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing them again. "Well, look who's back," she said warmly to his son. "How have you been, young man?" David's son practically glowed with happiness. "I've been practicing my dancing at home," he announced proudly. "Dad bought me a new music player for my room." "That's wonderful," Lisa said, and David could tell she really meant it. "Maybe we'll have another dance party tonight if the music comes on again." As they ate their dinner, David watched Lisa work her magic with other customers. She helped an elderly man who had trouble reading the menu due to poor eyesight. She patiently took an order from a woman whose speech was difficult to understand. She high-fived a little boy who was celebrating losing his first tooth. Every interaction was genuine and kind. When the dinner rush slowed down, David asked Lisa if she could sit with them for a moment. She looked around to make sure her other tables were taken care of, then pulled up a chair. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did the other night," David began. "You have no idea how much it meant to us." Lisa smiled. "It was my pleasure. Your son is a wonderful dancer. I hope he keeps it up." David took a deep breath. What he was about to say would sound crazy, he knew that. But he had to try. "I've been thinking a lot about that night," he said. "About how naturally you handled everything. how you made my son feel normal and included. I did some research and I learned about your background, about your daughter, about the work you do at the community center. Lisa looked surprised and a little uncomfortable. "Oh," she said quietly. "I hope that's okay. I didn't mean to make a big deal of anything." "That's exactly the point," David said. "You didn't make a big deal of it. You just did what felt right. And that's a gift that most people don't have." David paused, looking at his son who was coloring on a children's placemat, humming softly to himself. The change in the boy over the past week had been remarkable. He was more confident, more willing to go out in public, more hopeful about the future. "I want to make you an offer," David continued. "And I want you to hear me out before you say, no." Lisa looked puzzled but nodded for him to continue. "I want to start a foundation," David said. "A foundation that helps families dealing with disabilities, not just with money but with support, education, and most importantly with changing how society treats people with differences." Lisa's eyebrows raised with interest, but she remained quiet. "I want you to run it," David said simply. Lisa's mouth fell open in shock. "I'm sorry, what?" "I want you to be the director of this foundation. I'll provide all the funding. You provide the heart and the knowledge." Lisa shook her head immediately. "Mr. Chen, that's very kind, but I'm not qualified for something like that. I don't have a business degree or experience running an organization. I'm just a waitress trying to become a nurse." "That's exactly why you're perfect for the job," David said earnestly. "You understand what families go through because you've lived it. You know how to treat people with dignity because it comes naturally to you. You can spot what people need because you've needed it yourself." David leaned forward, his voice becoming more passionate. "Do you know how many so-called experts I've met over the past 3 years? Doctors, therapists, administrators, all with fancy degrees and impressive titles, but none of them did for my son what you did in 5 minutes of dancing." Lisa was still shaking her head. "But I don't know anything about running a foundation or managing budgets or—" "You can learn all that," David interrupted. "I'll hire people to teach you the business side. But what you have, the ability to see people as whole human beings instead of problems to be solved, that can't be taught." David pulled out a folder he had brought with him. "I've had my lawyers draw up some preliminary plans. The foundation would focus on 3 main areas. First, providing direct support to families, things like equipment, therapy, and respite care. Second, training programs for businesses, schools, and healthcare workers on how to interact respectfully with people who have disabilities." He opened the folder and showed Lisa some documents. "And third, community programs that bring people together, like what happened here the other night. Places where kids with disabilities can just be kids, where families can connect with others who understand their challenges." Lisa stared at the papers, overwhelmed. "This is incredible, but I still don't think—" "Your daughter," David said gently. "Think about your daughter. Think about all the children at the community center where you volunteer. This foundation could help thousands of kids like them. Kids like my son." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. David could see she was torn between wanting to help and feeling inadequate for such a big responsibility. "I would pay for you to finish nursing school," David continued. "In fact, I'd prefer it. A nursing background would make you even more qualified to run this kind of organization, and you'd earn a salary that would let you focus on this work without worrying about paying your bills." David's son looked up from his coloring. "Lisa, you should do it," he said with the simple wisdom of a child. "You're really good at helping people." Lisa laughed through her tears. "Well, if you think I should do it, I do," the boy said seriously. "You helped me remember that I can still dance. Maybe you can help other kids remember what they can do too." David watched as Lisa considered the proposal. He could see the exact moment when her fear transformed into possibility. Her eyes lit up with the same warmth he had seen when she danced with his son. "If I said yes," she asked slowly, "when would this all start?" "Tomorrow if you want," David replied. "I've already set aside the initial funding. We could start small, maybe with a pilot program right here in town, and grow from there. Lisa took a deep breath and looked around the diner where she had worked for 2 years. Then she looked at David's son, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's change some lives." 6 months later, the foundation had helped over 200 families and trained staff at 50 local businesses. David's son had become the foundation's youngest volunteer, helping other children discover their own ways to dance through life's challenges. And Lisa had found her true calling, not just as a nurse, but as someone who could help the world see that every person, regardless of their abilities, deserved to be celebrated for who they were.